Welcome to the Canoga Park Youth Arts Center's new series, Art Appreciation. Today, we are celebrating African American History Month by highlighting 4 artists whose contributions to art also highlighted their experiences as African Americans. During the 1920s and 30s, many African Americans moved to the Northeast to escape the racism of the South and to seek better opportunities in education and jobs. This is referred to as the Great Migration. Harlem, in New York City, was the final destination for many. They brought with them their talents, vision, and life experiences. And together, the Harlem Renaissance was born. Renaissance means rebirth. During this time, music, dance, art, fashion, literature, and politics flourished, inspiring the African American community to create art that reflected their unique experience. The 4 artists we'll be looking at today were all raised in households that were active in the arts and the civil rights movement. Our first artist we're going to look at today is Jacob Lawrence. He was an American painter who was born in New York to parents who migrated from the South. He was in foster care with his siblings for a short time, but was reunited with his mom in Harlem at 13. She enrolled him in after-school art classes, and he continued to receive scholarships to go to college. He is most known for his portrayal of African American historical subjects and contemporary life. He used blacks and browns contrasted with bright colors to bring the African American experience to life. He also taught at the University of Washington. He felt paintings needed 3 things: clear and strong, and those were about the aesthetics of the artwork, but he also felt they needed to be universal, that everybody could understand them. At 23, his 60 painting series called The Great Migration brought him national recognition. This painting is called The Builders. And you can tell how he's used the blacks and the browns contrasted with the bright colors of the clothes that the people are wearing. And this was also about building a new world for the African American community, that they were excited about the opportunities that were now being presented to them. This painting is called In the North, They Have Better Education. So this is part of the reason why so many African Americans migrated north, so they could have opportunity to have a better life. Our next artist is Faith Ringgold. She's an American painter, an illustrator, and a children's book author. She is 90 years old now and taught at San Diego State University. She was born in New York City. Her dad was a storyteller, and her mom was a fashion designer who would bring fabric home for Faith to play with. And her mom taught her how to sew. This led Faith to making her art on quilts. A quilt is like a blanket, only made from many small pieces sewn together. Her art reflects her everyday life growing up with friends, art, and music, surrounded by family. Let's look at this picture called The Tar Beach. Now, Faith Ringgold wrote a book called The Tar Beach, and what the tar beach is when you live in a city and you can't get to the real beach, if you go to the roof, you can have a much cooler summer night. And the roofs back then, and still are, covered with tar to keep them from leaking. So her family would all go up on the roof of their house, and that would be their way of cooling off on a hot summer night. Now, Faith wanted to be an author for a long time, but nobody would publish her books. So then she started writing on her quilts. You can see they all have like a border that goes around them, just like a quilt would. And then she started writing her stories, her life stories on her quilts. On this other painting by Faith, it's called The Sunflower Quilting Bee at Arles. Now, there's a little secret hiding in there. Maybe you recognize that man. That's Vincent Van Gogh. It's an homage to him because he made so many sunflower paintings. Now, you may or may not know what a quilting bee is, but as you can see, Faith is surrounded by her grandparents, her grandma and her mom and her aunts and her sisters, all the women of the house. And they all get together and they work on one quilt. And they used to have these back in the day before there were news broadcasts, so that the women would exchange the news of the town over these quilting bees. It was a way of exchanging information and offering support to one another. I think it's really cool that we see these sunflowers on the quilt, the pattern of all those, and then all of the sunflowers like they're standing in a sunflower field working on a sunflower quilt. I think all the yellows also make it feel really hot, and we know that it was really hot and where the sunflowers were in our leaves where he used to paint, Van Gogh used to paint. Our next artist is Kerry James Marshall, an American painter and sculptor who is 65 now and taught at the School of Art and Design in Chicago. He was born in Alabama and he moved to South Central LA as a child, and now he lives in Chicago. His dad was a postal worker and his mom was a homemaker. His home in LA was near the Black Panthers headquarters, which gave him a sense of social responsibility that he used in his art. He is most known for his black figures in his paintings. Now, when we see black, it's typically referred to as a negative space. That means nothing is there. So what he did was play around with that, and he would make what was invisible visible. By not just using a black paint, he used a lot of paint that he added to it, and he would bring form to these figures that you can see when you're right up close with it. So he was interested in how we take a color like black that's typically referred to as empty and fill it. So this was his solution. Now, on this painting of the barbershop, the name of that painting is De Style. Now, barbershops and that community were very important, as they are in many communities, for people to connect and share experiences. And just as Faith had an homage to Vincent Van Gogh in her sunflower painting, if you recall, we recently looked at Mondrian. And if we look at this painting, we can kind of see the influence there. And it's also in the title of The Style. So we can see a grid pattern, and we can see the primary colors that he used, the red, the blue, the yellow, in his composition. So in some ways, it's an homage to Mondrian as well. And now the next painting we're looking at is called Pastimes. Now you can take a look, if you go in close at some of these figures, you can see the different forms and the different colors, even within the range of black, that this is. And I think it was important for him to show that this was their experience. This was how they spent their time on a Sunday, doing these cool recreational things. Our last artist we're going to be looking at today is Romare Bearden. Now, he's an American artist, author, and songwriter. He was born in North Carolina and grew up in New York City. His dad played piano, and his mom worked in education and civil rights. His early work was about unity and cooperation within the African American community. He had quite a few unusual things that he did. He played semi-pro baseball, and he also served in the Army. His experiences with World War I left him feeling sad about the state of humanity, and he made art about that as well. He also worked in social services until he was quite old. He's best known for his collage work. He used photos from magazines, which at the time were kind of new and they had a slick quality about them. He also liked going back and grabbing old photographs from older magazines and incorporating them into his art. His interests were the everyday rituals of African American rural life in the South and urban life in the North. You can see how he's used the collages in combination with his painting, which gives it a very unusual look. This show was very well received when he first showed his collage work. The painting of the musicians is called Three Folk Musicians. You can see he's got pieces of hands that he's collaged on. The faces are partially collaged on, where he'll use maybe the eyes, nose, and mouth, but then he paints the rest. Bright colors, too. And the second painting we're going to look at is called Reunion. Again, we can see the collage. We can see these brightly colored palette that he chose to use, and the pattern. he was fascinated by pattern. He would draw rugs all the time, the patterns on rugs. He also did cartooning in his early years as well. I'm so glad you were here to join us in our celebration of African American History Month and got to enjoy these 4 amazing artists and their artworks. You know, being an artist is hard enough, especially when you have to speak your truth. And for these 4 artists, they spoke their truth and their experience. And for us, it gives us a window into their experience and a greater understanding. Now, it's one thing to go and look at art, and one day we'll be able to go look at art again, and I recommend you go look at art. But more importantly, go make some art. Go make it. It's fun. Don't worry about what it looks like when you're done. It's about the experience of making it. And I hope we have inspired you today. Thank you.